This is the main news in Korea. On the 17th, President Yoon Suk-yeol said, "From now on, I will look back on everything and thoroughly take care of it and verify it." He added, "We are now looking at where the problem lies, starting with the President's office." During the first official press conference held in the presidential office on the 100th day of his inauguration on the same day, President Yoon made this statement after being asked about the demands for personnel renewal raised from inside and outside the political arena. In addition, President Yoon emphasized that personnel renewal requires a very thorough inspection in order to meticulously support the people's livelihood, and should not be done for political purposes such as changing the situation or rebounding approval ratings. In this regard, President Yoon is planning to reorganize the PR line for the presidential office this week. It is known that Kim In-hae, a former member of the National Assembly who served as the first spokesperson during Yoon's election, will be appointed as the new presidential secretary for public relations. It is reported that spokesperson Kang In-sun is being replaced by a foreign press spokesperson, and a replacement spokesperson is being sought from an expert group with political acumen. Yoo Seung-min, a former member of the People's Power, who is famous for being an icon of betrayal like trash, directly hit President Yoon Suk-yeol, who celebrated his 100th day in office on the 17th, saying, "The biggest reason for the low public support for this regime lies in the president himself." Yoo, the icon of betrayal who wielded a knife behind former President Park Geun-hye, said on Facebook on the same day, "The president's thoughts, words and attitude are the problem." He said, "If the president does not change, the 100 pills are invalid." Regarding the press conference held on the 100th day of President Yoon's inauguration this morning, he pointed out, "It is impossible to know at all from today's press conference whether the president is really serious about the current situation and is ready to change everything. It seems that this trashy person still doesn't know what he's done wrong. A person like Yoo Seung-min is not even qualified to evaluate President Yoon. Yoo Seung-min, please mention only the sexual favors received by your adoptive son, Lee Junseok, a dog-like dog in non-human sheep's clothing." On the 17th, the Emergency Response Committee put a stop to the discussion on the revision of the party constitution, which has emerged as a new primer in the factional conflict within the Democratic Party of Korea. The non-captain Democratic Party held a meeting this morning and concluded that Article 80 of the party constitution would remain intact. The regulations stipulate that the duties of an officer charged with violating corruption-related laws may be suspended at the same time as the prosecution. The Democratic National Convention Preparatory Committee decided to amend this to include if the lower court finds a conviction of imprisonment or higher, the job will be suspended, but the non-captain did not accept it. It is interpreted that the blockade was started when there were signs that it would spread into a factional conflict, as protests continued, centered on the non-Lee Jae-myung community within the party, saying that it was not for Lee Jae-myung's bulletproof use. Regarding Korea-Japan relations, President Yoon Suk-yeol held a press conference on the 17th to commemorate the 100th anniversary of his inauguration at the Yongsan Presidential Office Building, saying, "I believe that through concessions and understanding, problems in the past can be resolved more smoothly and quickly when the two countries strengthen their future-oriented cooperative relationship." He said. President Yoon said, "How can we sit with people without a future and be mindful of the past?" President Yoon mentioned in his congratulatory speech that he wanted to develop relations between Korea and Japan. President Yoon said, "In Korea, a final judgment has already been issued by the Supreme Court, and the creditors of the judgment are expected to receive compensation according to the law. We are now deeply devising a way for them to receive compensation," he said. President Yoon also said, "I view the forced labor in a positive way." President Yoon said, "The Korea-Japan relationship has now become a relationship that requires close cooperation for the future, especially in light of the current security situation in Northeast Asia and the world, as well as in terms of supply chain and economic security. I think the government and the people can do it," he said. While refraining from commenting on North Korea's cruise missile test launch, it reiterated its position that it would closely coordinate with its allies, including South Korea, toward the goal of complete denuclearization of the Korean peninsula. When asked about North Korea's stance on the cruise missile launch, U.S. State Department spokeswoman Ned Price said at a briefing on the same day that there is no comment to comment on our treaty alliance in the Indo-Pacific. In other words, I want to say that we continue to focus on close coordination with South Korea and Japan. The State Department's refrain from expressing its position on North Korea's cruise missile provocation seems to have taken into account the fact that it is different from the launch of ballistic missiles banned by the UN Security Council. Earlier, North Korea test-fired 2 cruise missiles into the West Sea from Onkan in South Pyongan province early on the morning of the 17th, South Korea time, and resumed missile launches after more than 2 months. Spokesperson Price, however, made it clear that North Korea's previous ballistic missile provocations were obvious provocations, and took a firm stand in contrast to the response to North Korea's cruise missile launches. The launch of ballistic missiles is a clear threat to peace and security in the Indo-Pacific and beyond, he said. When asked if U.S. sanctions on North Korea would continue, Price said, "Unless North Korea changes its fundamental behavior and approach, it will continue. As I said recently, we strongly support what President Yoon Suk-yeol said," he said. In his Liberation Day congratulatory address on the 15th, President Yoon announced that he would propose a bold initiative that could dramatically improve North Korea's economy and people's livelihoods in line with the stage when North Korea stops developing nuclear weapons and transitions to practical denuclearization. In response, the State Department immediately stated that it supported South Korea's efforts. The complete denuclearization of the Korean peninsula is our common goal, Price said on the same day, and he repeatedly promised to work very closely with allies around the world, including South Korea and Japan. He also noted that the United States' commitment to North Korea's continued provocations on the security of its Indo-Pacific alliance, including South Korea and Japan, is firm. He stressed that not only would he seek to engage in such dialogue, but that he would hold North Korea accountable for provocations such as the launch of ballistic missiles and violations of UN Security Council resolutions. We will continue to do both of these to advance the broader goal of complete denuclearization of the Korean peninsula, he added. The U.S. Federal Reserve on the 16th recommended that banks seeking to enter into cryptocurrency-related transactions first check whether they are legal. In a supervisory letter released today, the Fed outlined steps that banks should take before engaging in coin-related transactions. For example, it is necessary to look at whether such activities are legally permitted and to determine whether data should be submitted to the authorities. The Fed also said that banks must notify the Fed in advance of initiating cryptocurrency-related transactions. He also emphasized that he must have appropriate systems and controls in place to ensure that virtual currency-related transactions are safe and sound. The Fed noted that while the cryptocurrency sector can present opportunities for banks, customers, and the financial system as a whole, it can also pose risks to health, consumer protection, and financial stability. The Fed's move comes days after Democrats, led by Senator Elizabeth Warren, urged the Monetary Authority to take a comprehensive approach to repeal existing cryptocurrency guidelines and work with other regulators. Reuters said. Earlier this year, regulators such as the Federal Reserve announced that they would clarify this year what types of trading activities banks could engage in with respect to cryptocurrencies. Meanwhile, large publicly traded Bitcoin mining companies in the U.S. reported a net loss of about $1.4 billion in the second quarter, Bloomberg reported. By company, Core Scientific recorded the biggest loss with $862 million, Riot Blockchain recorded a loss of $366 million and Marathon Digital Holdings recorded a loss of $192 million, respectively. The loss was due to impairment losses triggered by the collapse of the cryptocurrency market, with Bitcoin plummeting nearly 60% in the second quarter, Bloomberg said. These miners are struggling to pay off their debts and finance their operating expenses, causing their Bitcoin positions to shift from holding to selling, Bloomberg noted. Cryptocurrency research firm Arcane Crypto reported that these companies mined 3,900 bitcoins in June and sold 14,600 bitcoins during the same period. The interest burden of Jae-in's borrowers is increasing. As the saying goes, interest higher than monthly rent, the interest burden that tenants have to bear is expected to increase. According to the financial industry on the 18th, the upper end of the interest rate on the Jae-in's loan of commercial banks is close to 6% per annum. Last month, the weighted average interest rate of commercial banks' Jae-in's loans secured by the Korea Housing Finance Corporation's Jae-in's fund guarantee was expected to exceed 6%, from 3.27 to 5.2% per annum. The interest rates on Jae-in's loans in banks follow the COFIX. According to the Korea Federation of Banks, COFIX was 2.90% based on new transactions in July, up 0.52 percentage points from June. It replaced the 0.4 percentage point in June, the largest increase, in 1 month. As a result, COFIX soared to the highest level in 9 years and 5 months since February 2013. Jae-in's loans with variable interest rates are more vulnerable to rising interest rates. If the Bank of Korea raises the base rate at all 3 Monetary Policy Committee meetings remaining this year, including on the 25th of this month, it is predicted that the interest rate on Jae-in's loans will reach 7% per annum. In particular, the interest burden of those in their 20s and 30s who received a Jae-in's loan is expected to increase. The balance of bank Jae-in's loans among young people is increasing every year to 54.7381 trillion won at the end of 2019, 76.17 trillion won at the end of 2020 and 94,175.7 billion won in 2021. The proportion of youth generation among all borrowers of Jae-in's loans is also high, accounting for 61.1% of all borrowers as of the end of April. From the strike that hit sales in the first half of the year to cost hikes and the construction economic recession feared in the second half of the year, the ready-mixed concrete industry is suffering from a series of bad news. There are concerns that the company will face sluggish earnings this year if cost hikes and a slowdown in the construction economy become a reality in the second half of the year. The increase in cement prices is expected to lead to a burden on the ready-mixed concrete industry. The ready-mixed concrete has a structure in which the cement price is passed on to the cost due to the nature of the product, which must be supplied to construction companies by turning a mixer truck after receiving cement. Previously, ready-mixed concrete companies, together with the construction industry, took a joint response, demanding that the cement price calculation structure be disclosed. However, among ready-mixed concrete companies classified as medium-sized companies, it is difficult for companies affiliated with cement companies to participate, and thus lack of cohesion. Since most ready-mixed concrete companies are small and medium-sized enterprises, the industry has said that it is difficult to compare their price bargaining power with cement companies, which are mainly made up of mid-sized and large companies. The ready-mixed concrete industry has been hit hard by a strike before. In June, ready-mixed concrete shipments were stopped due to a strike by the Solidarity of Cargos, and in July, a ready-mixed concrete transportation union made up of ready-mixed concrete transporters went on strike during the annual transport cost negotiations. At that time, it was estimated that the ready-mixed concrete industry suffered 30 billion won in damage from the strike of the transportation union. The problem is the second half. While the cost burden has increased due to the increased cement price, the future competition is also a dark cloud. The Korea Construction Industry Research Institute predicted that the construction economy would be sluggish in the second half of this year in the Construction Business Outlook report for the second half of this year. In other words, it is inevitable to avoid the aftermath of rising prices, such as material costs and labor costs, as well as increase in financial costs. In fact, from January to April, construction investment decreased by 5.5% compared to the same period last year. It is analyzed that this is the effect of a sharp rise in the price of materials and labor costs. The Bank of Korea also lowered its construction investment forecast for this year to a 0.5% decline from the previous 2.6% increase, and the Korea Development Institute sharply lowered its forecast for construction investment this year from a 2.4% increase to a 1.3% decline. There are concerns that business activity itself will contract due to the deterioration of the construction market in the second half of the year. The chairman of Kumho Asiana Group, who was accused of unfairly mobilizing group affiliates to support a company with a high stake in the family, was sentenced to 10 years in prison in the first trial and arrested. The 24th Criminal Settlement of the Seoul Central District Court announced on the 17th that the former chairman of Kumho Asiana was sentenced to 10 years in prison at the sentencing hearing for 4 people who were handed over to trial on charges of embezzlement and breach of trust under the Special Cases Act. The executive director of Kumho Asiana Group, who was indicted along with Asiana chairman, was sentenced to 5 years in prison, and the head of the Business Strategy Office and the vice president of Asiana Airlines Finance Department were sentenced to 3 years in prison. Kumho Asiana Group was fined 200 million won. Former Asiana chairman Park is also accused of handing over Asiana Airlines exclusive in-flight catering business rights to Swissgate Group at a low price of 133.3 billion won, and in exchange for taking over 160 billion won worth of Kumho Express bonds with warrants. While the Cargo Solidarity headquarters of the Public Transport Workers Union of the KCTU held an occupancy on the rooftop of the Haejinro headquarters for the second day, the police are paying attention to the possibility of bringing in thinner. However, union members of the Freight Solidarity are having difficulties preparing for a response as the rooftop door is locked. Both the police and fire departments are preparing to respond with the possibility of bringing in thinner by union members. 1 out of 11 union members who entered the rooftop of Haejinro headquarters in Cheongdam-dong, Gangnam-gu, Seoul early the morning of the previous day returned home for personal reasons on the morning of the 17th, and it was found that 10 people are currently guarding their seats. However, it was confirmed that both the police and firefighters did not know whether thinner was brought in, or even the number of repairs, because union members locked the rooftop of Haejinro headquarters. Even this morning, about 240 police officers are guarding the headquarters in case of an unexpected situation. A police official explained, "It is not possible to understand what items the union members on the roof brought in, including thinner." The fire department also placed a guard window around the headquarters and mobilized an ambulance and a pump car, and it was confirmed that a total of 8 crew members were waiting at the scene. The boundary Gwanchong means to extinguish the fire in case of an emergency by using the ejection device attached to the end of the fire hydrant to put out the fire. 1 air mattress has been installed in front of the headquarters since the previous day for safety, but whether additional installations have been made has not been decided yet. Prosecutors are investigating the case of a public official who was shot and killed by a North Korean soldier in the West Sea, and at the time, the Blue House, the National Intelligence Service, and high-ranking officials of the Ministry of National Defense were raided and searched. After receiving the accusation, we have been conducting a basic investigation for a month, and it seems that the summons investigation of key personnel is also imminent. The search and seizure targets include the homes of former Blue House National Security Office Director Seok-Yeol, former National Intelligence Service Director Park Ji-won, and former Defense Minister Seo Wook. At the time of the incident, it was aimed at key officials of the Blue House, the National Intelligence Service, and the highest-ranking positions in the Ministry of National Defense at the same time. Former Director Park Ji-won is accused of instructing the National Intelligence Service to delete the intelligence report produced by the National Intelligence Service through the Chief of Staff before and after the emergency ministerial meeting right after a public official was shot in September 2020. After the death of a public official, the former head of the office is known to have presided over 3 meetings of related ministers and coordinated the situation, including the level of response. Prosecutors are questioning whether the government has set the direction for North Korea at these meetings, as the military and coast guards began to mention the alleged North Korean defection in earnest with the disclosure of the facts of the attack on the morning of September 24, right after the third ministerial meeting. In an answer to the National Assembly right after the incident, former Minister Seok-Yeol said, "I have ordered to look into the possibility of a North Korean defection." In the search and seizure, it was found that data related to the Coast Guard commander, including former Coast Guard Commissioner Kim Hong-hee, was also secured. As soon as the prosecution completes the analysis of the confiscated material, it will summon Seo, former Director Park, and former Minister Seo to rule out the possibility of drift and investigate the grounds for the announcement of the North Korean defection. Korail, which had been selling only half of the holiday train tickets due to the Corona-19 epidemic, is making reservations for all seats ahead of Chuseok next month, but users have experienced inconvenience, such as the server being stopped because it could not handle the surge in demand. It is pointed out that the number of users is expected to increase due to the lifting of social distancing, and the same problem has been repeated several times in the past, suggesting that preparations were poorly made. Reservations for trains on the Jae-yongbu line, Jae-yongjin line, and Donghae line were held from 7 a.m. on the same day, but as soon as the site was opened, a large number of visitors stopped for about 20 minutes. Many users struggled with the reservation site on their busy commute to work and eventually got frustrated because they could not get a ticket. An office worker who was trying to book a train ticket to Ulsan said, "The whole family connected after waiting for 30 minutes using computers and smartphones, but even this soon stopped working, so I had no choice but to give up the reservation. Aren't we supposed to put it out?" he exclaimed. As the COVID-19 pandemic continues, more than 170,000 new cases have been confirmed nationwide by 9 p.m. on the 17th. According to each local government, including the Seoul Metropolitan Government, from midnight to 9 p.m. on the same day, 170,70 people in 17 cities and provinces across the country were confirmed, 5,695 fewer than the count for the same time period the day before. However, as there is still time until midnight, when the counting ends, the number of new confirmed cases announced on the 18th is expected to increase further, recording the mid 170,000 mark. As of midnight for 1 week from the 11th, the number of new cases per day averaged 119,576 per day. Meanwhile, the quarantine authorities are predicting that the COVID-19 resurgence will slowly decrease after peaking within 200,000 new confirmed cases per day this month. Last week, the infection reproduction index was 1.18, maintaining above 1 for 7 consecutive weeks. The number of hospitalized patients with severe serious illness is 469, and the death toll is 42. However, the overall bed utilization rate was 51.0% and the critical care bed utilization rate was 43.7%, a slight decrease from the previous day. Accordingly, the government judged that there is still room for the overall medical resources and medical response capacity. Starting this week, hospitals in the upper-level general hospitals in the metropolitan area will be operating beds for severe COVID-19 on weekends. The general coordinator said, "On weekends and holidays, it was often difficult for patients with severe underlying diseases, high-risk mothers, and newborns to be assigned a bed quickly. We operate a weekend hospital on duty with severe beds," he said. In addition, the government added that it would monitor the status of administration of therapeutics by province to increase the administration rate of oral medicines, and analyze obstacles in areas with low administration rates and come up with improvement plans. The expiration date of the unused COVID-19 vaccine is approaching, but it is not easy for the government to find a way to deal with it, such as donating it overseas. As of July 6, Korea discarded 5.29 million out of 145.84 million doses of total vaccine introduction. By vaccine type, AstraZeneca 260,000 doses, Pfizer 1.58 million doses, Moderna 1.97 million doses, Novavax 1.43 million doses, and Janssen 50,000 doses. Most of them are discarded due to the expiration of the validity period in June of this year, the Korea Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, KCDC, explained. The shelf life of vaccines is usually between 6 months and 1 year. The vaccination rate is rising slowly, but as the expiration date of the remaining vaccine approaches, the government is devising a supply-demand adjustment plan to reduce the discard rate. Last month, the government also cancelled contracts for 4 million doses of Janssen and 12.65 million doses of vaccine through COVAX, an international cooperation organization for vaccine supply. It also negotiated with Pfizer not to supply vaccines in the third quarter. According to the report, Novavax was scheduled to introduce an additional 37.67 million servings within this year. However, the Korea Centers for Disease Control and Prevention extended the supply period to next year, delaying the introduction. This is because Novavax has introduced 2.33 million servings so far, but only used 580,000. The discard rate reached 61.4%. An official from the Korea Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, KCDC, explained, as the contract period is extended, adequate quantities are coming in, so there will be almost no disposal volume right now. Currently, there are 1,5044,000 doses of vaccine remaining in Korea as of the 10th. Pfizer's 9529,000 servings, Moderna's 3,181,000, Janssen's 1984,000s, and Novavax's 147,000 remain. The Pfizer pediatric edition has 203,000 servings. In the case of Novavax, which has reduced the amount due to the adjustment of the introduction period, the expiration date is until October, so the deadline is short. However, the authorities explained that it is not easy to find a foreign donor country. First of all, unlike in the early days of corona, there are enough supplies around the world. The prevalence of low severe risk Omicron mutations has also reduced urgent demand. An official from the Korea Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, KCDC, said, the worldwide demand for vaccines is declining compared to the past, so it is not easy to find a country to donate to. In Korea, an additional 130 million doses of vaccine are expected to be introduced by the end of the year. The government plans to announce the vaccination plan in the second half of this month, including the issue of supply and demand for vaccines. A plan to introduce an improved vaccine that can respond to Omicron mutations is also expected to be announced. In relation to the recent assault on a union member of the Jae order in front of Bonggyunsa Temple, criticism from within the Buddhist community is growing. In a statement on the 17th, the alumni behavior of the Buddhist Association of Korean University students said, Buddhists cannot raise their faces because they are ashamed of the fact that this incident of violence was perpetrated by the monks who had to save lives through the practice of shaving and courage. Said. On the 14th, Park Jong-jae, the head of the Planning and Public Relations Department of the Jae order, was assaulted by two monks while preparing a one-man demonstration in front of Bonggyunsa Temple to criticize Jae-seung's former general director of the Jae order for intervention in the election. In the process, Manager Park also covered up filth presumed to be human waste. One of the monks who assaulted Director Park apologized in writing on the 16th, saying, it was a shameful act that caused deep concern to the monks and Buddhists working in temples and regions across the country. An official from the Jae Orders Union said, currently, Park Jong-jae is hospitalized, and the police investigation has not been completed. I need this, he said. Right now, only one monk has issued an apology, but the Jae Orders Union views this incident as a pre-planned group assault rather than an individual deviance by the monks, he said. The collusion relationship must be revealed as to who the co-conspirators and directives are, he said. Reports have emerged that Apple is considering producing Apple Watch, MacBook and HomePod speakers in Vietnam to reduce its dependence on China. According to Nikkei Asia and CNBC on the 17th, Apple asked a Vietnamese supplier to set up a MacBook test production line, and the supplier started production testing of the Apple Watch. Apple is also in negotiations to produce HomePod speakers in Vietnam. This is interpreted as an increase in geopolitical risks due to the escalating trade tensions between the US and China, and the repeated high-strength lockdown in China, which indicates that Apple is diversifying its production bases to solve the supply chain problem. Apple, which has relied heavily on China for the production of its major products, has been steadily diversifying its production bases outside of China. Apple already makes some AirPods in Vietnam, and it started moving some of its iPad production to Vietnam in June. Apple has been producing iPhone 13 in India since early this year, and iPad production in India is expected to take place soon. Chinese President Xi Jinping resumed official activities after a month. It is observed that the Bidahe Conference, which discusses overall state affairs with the leadership in a broad sense, including the Chinese elders, has ended. According to China's state-run Central Television on the 17th, President Xi visited the Liao Line Battle Memorial in Jianzhou City, Liaoning Province, the previous day. It is the first time in a week since Xi attended a banquet hosted by the Ministry of National Defense held at the Great Hall of the People in Beijing on the 31st of last month. Premier Li Keqiang also visited Shenzhen, Guangdong Province on the 16th to hold a video conference with leaders of 6 major provinces, including Guangdong Province. The prevailing view was that the Bidahe meeting had been held over the past 15 days. At this meeting, the biggest concern is the schedule of the 20th Party Congress in the fall and whether Xi will decide on a third consecutive term. Diplomats inside and outside are predicting that a third term will be easy given the strong Xi-centered leadership system. The Liao Sun Battle Memorial, visited by President Xi, was a key battle in the Northeast Liberation War, which was part of the Civil War. The Northeast Liberation War was a battle fought between the People's Liberation Army and the Kuomintang Army in the northeastern region between early August 1945 and November 1948, just before Japan was defeated. In this battle, the Communist Party won the victory by subduing the Kuomintang Army backed by the United States. It is analyzed that the U.S. House of Representatives Speaker Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan and its past history were linked to a warning message to both the U.S. and Taiwan. Thank you for watching today. Please like and subscribe.